Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Becoming Solo podcast, a podcast dedicated to real and honest stories about the life journey, about awakening moments, and ultimately what it means to be your most authentic self. Today, I have the privilege of speaking with Linda Gonzalez. I'm so grateful to learn more about your story. So, let me tell you a little bit more about Linda. Linda Gonzalez is a bilingual life and business coach, consultant, and author. Her passion is to inspire people on a creative journey of love and healing for this and future generations. She integrates heart and body practices into her work, understanding that healing the human spirit is essential to our well-being and liberation. Key point, liberation. So beautiful. She facilitates a BIPOC, which is Black, Indigenous, and People of Color, sanctuary writing program that includes coaching, writing sessions, developmental editing, and craft workshops. Linda received a MSW from the University of Southern California. She also has a MFA in creative writing from Goddard College and received a BA from Stanford University. She was born and raised in Los Angeles by parents from Mexico and Colombia. She has called the Bay Area home for many years, and she is still raising and being raised by her millennial twins. Welcome, Linda. It's so great to have you today. I'm really, really excited to talk to you about your work as an author and writer and coach and all the amazing things that you do, especially with such a open perspective, and also you are your authentic self. So excited to talk to you. Thank you for being here. The first question I have for you, could you just please share a little bit about that pivotal awakening moment that led you to becoming a business coach, consultant, and author?
Great question. I would say that there were several pivotal, I call them transformational moments. The biggest one in terms of all of those was the decision to not be an employee and to become a solopreneur, which I have been for many, many years. And interestingly enough, that journey began with me being in different jobs that were in the helping professions as a social worker, and realizing that when I spoke the truth, right, what I considered the truth, when there were issues of inequity, when there were ways that I thought we could help and support people in a more authentically, culturally competent way, that if my supervisors didn't believe the way I believed in that I, in some ways, they saw me as a threat. And I had three very specific negative experiences, which led to suspension, demotion, and termination. And after the termination, I went, you know what? People actually really don't want to hear the truth. And I also realized that power is real, and it often trumps truth. And so it was very transformational for me to realize that. And it led me to go, well, then how else can I be as close to my truth and to the truth of what I know about the world and what people need and what helps people flourish? And so I began the bumpy journey of being a solopreneur, which began with doing trainings and having people take me under their wing, really learning how important it is to have people who mentor you and believe in you and see what you can be. And through all that journey, I have done many, many things in my life. Right now, the focus is definitely on life and business coaching. And also, as I have been an author and claimed that space as a writer for probably about 20 years or so. And also, so and I have been a consultant on and off for many years, mostly with nonprofits, some philanthropic arenas and educational arenas. Really, the most important for me in all of that, and that was the transformational lesson, which I had to trust the leadership. That when I do work either with my clients or with organizations, I have to trust that the leadership believes in the right to every person's power and every person's capacity to be their full selves, bring their full selves, and that they will not be shut down.
Wow. So basically, you're sharing such a like radical story, just being able to being in a space. I guess I call it kind of like conformity.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, just I know personally, like I been dabbling with what does it mean to like enter like a job or like the workforce and having to actually like conform to the idea of what that space entails rather
Right.
than being like creative and a bit radical and outside of the box. And as you said, speaking the truth. Uh, a lot of people who are like that kind of do get in trouble. So good
Good
trouble.
trouble, good
Yeah,
trouble.
good trouble. Um, so it's really inspiring to hear that you may have experienced that, but look at you as a solopreneur. Is that what are you saying? Solopreneur?
Solopreneur, people talk about being
What is it on?
entrepreneur.
I was gonna say, could you clarify for me?
Yeah. Well, for me, I am claiming and it as is that I am the CEO, the CFO, the COO. I'm the creative director. I am the janitor. I am the program director. I am the program evaluator. Like, and it doesn't mean that I don't get assistance on many, many areas, right? I've definitely hired other consultants and assistants to help me. But by and large, probably 85 and sometimes up to 100% of the work is mine to do and mine to hold. And so
Mhm.
that's really different from for me when in an entrepreneurial space where perhaps you have a partner, well, perhaps you have actually have staff where you have resources that will support what you're trying to do. So I find that that differentiation is important for me.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. I've heard the word, but I've never actually knew exactly what the terminology was. So thank you.
You're
Um,
welcome.
so I'd like to talk a little bit more about your work as an author.
Mhm.
So in your memoir, The Cost of Our Lives, seems like it was such a vulnerable you know, peace, honestly. You speak about family secrets that you discovered at 16 years old and how you navigated that with, family relationships and dynamics. Could you speak a little bit about what that inspiration was to just like write about it, be so vulnerable, and share that with the world?
Thank you. I really have always been a writer. I say I claimed it about 20 years ago, but when I was 12 and I kept a journal and I wrote a lot of letters back in the day when we would write them by hand and or type them and then send them to people. And so it's always been a part of my life. And in all of my writing, I was always drawn to self-reflection and introspection. And so the genre, if you will, that I tend to work in is called creative nonfiction. So it is really about writing essays and then ultimately books. The memoir came when I was beginning to start going to workshops and start beginning to understand what it meant to be a writer and the craft part of it, right?
Hmm.
And so I remember going to a conference for a couple of days up in the Sierra Nevadas here in California. And the teacher said, what is the story that you want to write? What is that thing that really matters to you? And I thought, oh, the story of my father and his two families. And so that was really the spark or the journey or the moment when I said, no matter what, I'm going on this journey. And of course, I had no idea it would take 13 years from beginning to end.
Wow.
Yeah, and three or four different structures of the memoir, many, many workshops, many, many teachers, many writing groups, a lot of introspection, a lot of my nephew read the book finally a while ago and he said, how'd you do that? And I go, well, sometimes I was in my bed writing and then I'd have to stop and cry and then I'd get back to writing. And because particularly memoir or nonfiction really requires you to be vulnerable, as you said. And one
Yeah.
of the things I know about good writing is that nobody can be perfect. And if you read or write a good story, everyone has to have their flaws, everyone has their amazing moments. And so as I was writing the story of my family,
Mhm.
I had to look at all of us like characters. I had to make sure that they were full, embodied people with things that you could love about them and things that drove you crazy about them. And, so that was really the important part of it. And it really required me to believe that this would heal as part of my purpose, right? That it was to heal my generation and also to heal future generations. I wanted my children, the children of my siblings, to not have secrets,
Mm.
even though I think on some level secrets may be inevitable. And it also, I didn't want to pretend or make of life something that it wasn't, which in some ways my parents did, not in a bad way, but in a way that they felt they needed to as immigrants to protect themselves. And I understood that. And I also understood that I was not that person and that was not my life. So writing is about claiming your voice and the story that really matters to you. And that was the one that really mattered to me. And I also knew, because I got feedback all along the way, that the theme, while it was a very specific story, it was also very universal because it was about secrets and lies. It was about betrayal. It was about redemption. It was about families. It was about, how are we fair to ourselves? How are we fair to the people around us?
Wow. I I'm curious. You writing this, I imagine maybe it brought up things in the family. Um, what would you say to someone who would want to write something super, super vulnerable and it's a story of your life because you claim it like you experienced it,
Right.
but it has to do with maybe others' mistakes or other people's uh things that they don't necessarily want in the light. What would you share with someone who's
Uh,
thinking that? Because
Yeah.
that's rough. Because
Yeah. Oh no, 100%. That's why people write fiction and often it's a little thinly veiled nonfiction. I, I get that. I totally get that. What I say is you have to listen to the story that needs to be told and you have to honor it. The other thing I say is you cannot write it thinking about everybody else in your life because then you're already muting and editing the story and it's losing its power. Now, I also, as I said, nobody is the bad guy or the good guy in the end in my stories because I believe that we're complex human beings and that even if we do the right thing, if we do it for the wrong reason, it's, or vice versa, we could do the wrong thing for the right reason, right? We are complicated human beings. And I know that people in my family, um, I think struggled with the story on some level. Both my parents had passed away by then, so I
Mhm.
think that in some level freed me.
Okay.
Some people were, read that both of my kids, which is the two people that mattered the most to me, they read it and they didn't have a negative experience. I remember my son saying, "Wow, our family's a bit complicated," and I said, "Pretty much everyone's is, right?" Um, and so I haven't had a lot of conversations with my family, honestly. I'm not sure how many of them have read it. And all I can do is hope that it was of benefit if they did. I certainly had a wonderful conversation with my nephew about it. And yeah, it was hard for him. He was like, "Yeah, those were really hard years." And I said, "Yes, they were." I go, and there was a lot of really good things that came out of it and a lot of powerful shifts in relationships. And that for me was what stood out for me. I can imagine, from his perspective, I'd lived the story for 13 years. I'd been able to process it and cleanse it and understand it on a deep level. I think someone who just read it the first time, I think like for him, it was kind of forcing him to remember the difficult times.
Yeah.
And so it was good. We had a good conversation where I said, yeah, but remember this? And did you see that? And, he began to see it. And I had to understand that everybody reads every story differently from depending on where they are in that part of their lives and what they're able to remember or think about. And sometimes, and we all do that, right? When we read stories, sometimes they're painful and sometimes they're liberating. And our job as writers is not to think that we can control someone's response. Our job is to share and do the work that is ours to do.
Ooh, wow. Um, with writing like a memoir too, I imagine there's some, you mentioned also like writing a bit and then kind of like the tears flowing and
Yeah.
going back and forth and, having to almost just remember things. And I think while we share our stories, it could be a bit messy, like even just the things that'll come up. How do you define healing as a writer and author, and what role has it played in your life journey?
I mean, I think healing is not simple.
Mm.
I think that it is an ongoing journey.
Okay.
I know that sometimes, often, healing leaves scars,
Mm.
right? Like we can think about, I don't know, probably most of us have some scar somewhere on our body, physical scar from something where we were physically harmed. And then, it healed as best it could, right?
Yeah.
Like I remember cutting
I have a
my,
scar on my forehead
there
somewhere,
you go. Exactly.
and I
So
always remember the story.
you remember the story, but your scar doesn't hurt, right? Like it is, your body has integrated
Ooh,
the
okay.
scar into your body. And so it is not a separate part of who you are. And I believe that is a lot of what healing is. It is not about having unblemished bodies or spirits, or right. It is about integrating it into our body, right? If someone has a heart attack and they end up having to get, bypass surgery or shunts or all the different things you do, the heart still works, right? It still beats, it does what it's supposed to do. It integrates the healing.
Hmm.
Technically, that is a part of the healing of the process. And so I believe that healing is not about making something the way it was. 100% not about what the way it was. It's also not about the way you wish it could be.
Ah,
To
the
me
way.
is about accepting fully and completely the present moment, right? Which is in your case, yeah, there's a scar on my forehead and it doesn't stop me from doing anything in the world that I want to do. And I think maybe that is the healing, is that it doesn't, we're not stopped. We might be afraid, we might have memories, but we don't stop doing the things that matter to us, that nurture our spirit and our heart, and helps us to care for our community.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. I think I completely agree with you too. I do hear a lot. I was even talking about this recently. People are like, I'm healed. I'm
Yeah,
healed. I'm healed from this. I'm healed from that. And that just never really resonated with my heart and soul. Because I think it takes away from our story as well.
right. That's
Um,
right.
Not that we have to define with what exactly always happened to us, but it's part of us. So I love that you say healing is a journey and it goes on and continues, and I believe it'll come back up in other parts of your life and go away, come up, and you're like, ah, here we go again. Um,
Very true.
yeah, and the thing about, healing and also being an author, you work predominantly with BIPOC folks, and I feel like that is, as someone who, I won't, I guess I could say I'm a writer, maybe, but I do like to write,
Yes.
and I know with people who identify as a BIPOC part of that community, it could be really hard to tell our stories,
Yeah.
because our stories can come with a lot of complexities, a lot of different things, and it's there's trauma and um there's a lot that could come with that because
That's
of
right.
just the way we are in our communities and things that we've personally experienced. What are some of like the biggest challenges that you notice when you work with BIPOC folks as writers and authors? Um,
Yes. Well, the first one is exactly what you modeled for all of us, which was, well, I guess I'm a writer. I
there
like to
we
write.
go.
Yes, because we are so much more hesitant to claim our voice and our place.
Yeah.
I remember listening to a podcast, maybe it was years ago, and there was this young white man, and his child was, I think, 2. And he was doing this whole like parenting podcast. And I said, really? Like your kid is 2. Like my kids are, I think at the time they were maybe in their teens and I was like, I wouldn't even dare to think I had much to say, right? Until they were out, I don't know, 18 or 19. Like I'd gone a whole journey with them. So I think that one of the challenges is that we can't, we are set up by society to have to be perfect and do it right. And so we just often won't do it unless we feel like we're going to be the best because we have gotten the message that that's what we have to be accepted. And the publishing world is as unfair and as restricted and as controlled by the dominant culture as every other industry, which means that the publishers that I send my essays or my books to, the agents,
Mm,
all the machinations of the publishing industry is just as uneducated around their biases and the realities of what they think not only about who we are and our right to write, so to speak, but also about the stories we're allowed to tell. I mean,
mm,
I remember when I was writing my memoir and a publisher said, yeah, this kind of seems a little genealogical and I kind of, maybe your family will like it. And I was like, okay. Like, so, it's real. And I had to reject that feedback and say no, I reject that, the smallness of what you are saying about my writing, because I know it is more than that and it will be of value to many people. And so part of the challenge is just the sort of standard, the high standard we place on ourselves before we embrace the
mhm,
fact that we are writers. And the other piece around it is, yes, of course, then it's about believing that our story matters, that what we have to say matters. Again, you can see this mirrors every part of the, of
mhm,
the cultural challenges that everybody has anywhere that they are. And so I think that that is another one. The other one is that role models are so important in our lives. Again, no matter the industry, and writing is no different. There are so many more writers of color than there used to be, 100%. Certainly in my lifespan of writing, it's gotten more and more and more, and there's more, and I know that it's still, if you look at the data, we're still like, 10% of what's published.
mm.
And so we elevate ourselves and
Is
we
that
elevate,
all BIPOC?
yeah. I mean, yes. And then women even, it's just terrible. It's terrible. Um, and so even though we elevate ourselves and we elevate each other, in general, the industry, the bigger industry, which is, what gets put in, what do book uh, buyers buy and
Mm,
what books are in the airport and what books get featured in the top 10 books, who
or
wins the prizes,
best
all of that.
sellers.
Yes. And so we can think, oh, okay, that means that people like me don't get to get the kind of glory and certainly not the money
Hmm.
that white people get. And I'm not saying it's easy for white writers. I mean, 100% it isn't. And in comparison, it's shocking.
Mm. What would you say needs to be done to interrupt and disrupt the system when it comes to this, the writing field and publishers and navigating? What would you say can be done?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's so many things. And again, I think it's really, again, looking at the bigger culture, what do we need to do to interrupt racism
Oh,
or
yeah.
uh, sexism or homophobia or, the whole caste system as Isabel Wilkerson has written about, all the ways that people are put in boxes in terms of what they're allowed to be and do in the world. And so I don't think it can be one response. I think certainly when I used to do a lot of DEI work in the world for a long time, we would talk about that you have to interrupt it on the institutional level. So on the institutional level, the policies and the procedures, and obviously part of the policies and the procedures is who gets hired and who gets promoted and who gets power. It's also on the cultural level, like what are the unspoken rules, like when you go to work in a new place, there are ways that people are, and it's not in the personnel manual. You have to figure it out, often by making mistakes. And so the cultural level norms of one right way, and so many ways of behaving that say competition, that you have to feel comparative and competitive with everybody rather than opening up and sharing what you know and what you have learned with other people, and know that anybody being elevated is you being elevated, right? There's the whole thing about the when the water raises, I can't remember, when you raise the water, all ships go up. There's some idiom that I don't remember right now, but you know what I'm saying.
That's okay.
And so, that whole idea of shifting from competitive to cooperative,
Mm,
and really going, it's not about there can only be five Black authors or Latinx authors. And or I know somebody said when she had a cookbook, she was a Arab cook, and she said when she went to a publisher, they said, well, we already published our Arab cookbook for the year, right? And can you imagine them saying, oh, we already published our, I don't know, our Italian or our European, our French cook one, we're going to just do one a year. And so the ways that we are told there's only one spot, and so you're all going to have to fight
mm.
for it. I mean,
Ooh,
it's real.
no, that
I
is
mean,
so real. Yeah, even, translating that into like workplace and just life
yeah,
dynamic, like there's always it feels like there's always one spot. And
yes,
once the one person is in that spot, it's hard. It's
it
hard.
is. And it's also part of how, oppression is is fed, which is that you have to be that one person, and therefore your responsibility is to be the voice of everybody. Or I was talking to a doctor the other day, and I said, how many of us, if we speak a second language, immediately, especially Spanish, have all our lives been pulled in to translate and interpret? It's not our job description. It's not, we don't get paid more. And we're not also trained to do it. Like I have friends who are interpreters and translators, and they have to go through an incredibly rigorous training program to do it well. And so, there's just so many ways where we are asked to do more work, often less pay, and
Hmm.
absolutely less value. So it is a challenging question as to how do you disrupt it. It's also us not accepting what we are told is our place, as you said, right? The challenge is if you get into, it might be good trouble, but it can also be trouble that lands you outside of the workforce. And so, I remember my father like saying, you have to tell the truth. And I went, yeah, that's not really working.
Ah, ah, yeah, yeah. Um, with I know you host you have the sanctuary writing program. So with all of the complexities and things that we have to navigate as people of color, BIPOC folks, what are some of the things that you integrate within that writing program that help people kind of break through all of that a bit?
Yeah, thank you. I I talk about sanctuary, process, and voice.
Mm.
And sanctuary is the most important one because we are not given permission and value to our words and our writing. We need safe spaces
Mhm.
to believe in ourselves and to offer community to other people. That's was absolutely true for me throughout my entire writing career. I started out writing with, 3 or 4 other Latinas. We just get together and write. And then I got into a writing group for many years. It was all women of color. The conferences I went to were all people of color. I looked for people of color authors and teachers because I knew how much it mattered for me to have role models to see that, yes, people like me can get published, can do well. I mean, well, not financially, but well in terms of being able to get published. That's a whole other story. Um, and so the other one is process. I just did a workshop called Claiming Your Space. And one of the things I talked about was like anything else we do, we need the right tools, we need the right structure to do well. Because if we can't figure out where all our writing goes, or if we don't know where we put things, then it becomes a harder process.
Wow.
And if we have not created the correct ambiance in our writing, like do you need to have some kind of a ritual before you start writing? Like, where's your favorite, what do you need to set yourself up before you write to be uninterrupted,
Mm.
to have what you need to do your writing. And then process is also, I said, organizationally, where are you going to keep your writing? How are you going to organize it? What tools might you need? Like for anything that we do, we need the right tools. We need organization. We do it for all the other parts of our life, and we have to do it for our writing life as well.
Mm. Wow. Yeah, I feel like also since I'm a writer, I during, as over the last few years, I been trying to find community. And I think honestly, you're the first person that I actually see having that community when it comes to this
Mm.
space. So while I was in New York, I remember just looking for different groups, and it mostly was white older women, to be
Yes,
honest.
I'm telling you, that's true.
Yeah, it was just white older women, and I couldn't relate. I
Right.
almost felt like an imposter. I felt afraid and
Yes, and that's what you're meant to feel, not because they themselves are trying to make you feel
yeah.
that way. It is the context of the situation. And I have done some workshops where it's been, most all white women and me. And, they're the ones who said, well, why do you put Spanish in your writing? We don't know what it means. And I went, well, you're not my audience, number one. And number two, we put in German words and French words and all kinds of words in other languages,
And
and
I looked them up.
you either figure out from context or you look them up.
Yeah.
And so, but they were like, we want your writing to make us comfortable. And I'm like, yeah, that's not why I'm writing.
Mm, yeah. Wow. That's really, really helpful because I've definitely been there.
I can give you some more resources, Chelsea, for
Yes.
sure.
Thank you. Um, can you share kind of a specific experience or challenge that tested your resilience, that led you to like the more significant growth in your life, um,
Well,
through being an author
yeah.
and writing? Where were you tested the most and challenged?
Well, many. I'll talk now, uh, which is, I mean, the biggest test has been that in terms of my writing life, I have not been able to get a traditional publisher to publish my books. And not because my books aren't amazing, not because I didn't try hard enough, not because I didn't wasn't strategic, all the ways that we think it's something we did. It is really, as I said, there's a very limited number of spots. Just generally in the book world,
Yeah.
it's a very competitive world, and even more competitive for BIPOC writers. And so, and I'm still being tested because I have two completed collections of essays, which I did what I did with my first two books, which is I found the agents that supported and respected and wanted to publish people of color.
Mhm.
And I queried them. I also queried publishers who have consistently published people of color. And so maybe that's a pro and a con, right? If you're consistently publishing people of color, then you get a lot of people of color submitting to them.
Yeah.
But if to submit to places that I could see had never published a person of color, I go, yeah, I'm not gonna, that doesn't make any sense either. So it's a challenge to make yourself, you think that the hardest thing is writing the book. No. Then the hardest thing is editing the book. No. Then the hardest thing is then querying the book, right? Because then you got to send your queries out. No. Then the hardest part is getting no's. No. And then you have to go, okay, so the first book was a hybrid. I published it hybrid. So that meant that it was published like a regular book by a press, but I had to pay them.
Mm.
And then the second book, I just went straight for again, because I got all no's, I had to do the self-publishing, although I also paid them and they did a lot of the work. These two books, one is still out, one is still got a few presses and a few contests looking at it. But I will be publishing one of my essay collections by the end of the summer. And again, I went, now I'm going the most inexpensive route because it's so much money. Oh my goodness. You do not make, it's not a money-making deal. You do it because you love it. You do it because, it's your passion.
Yeah.
But it's not about making money. It's absolutely about you will always spend more money than you make. And I'm talking about not just me. I'm talking about I know so many authors. I know authors who've gotten, the bigger publishers to publish their books and they've gotten advances and they all still have full-time jobs. You
Wow.
know? I've gone to their book readings where they've had books translated into 5, 6, 7 languages, and they got 10 people in the audience. It's just a difficult um, field, and you have to be so driven internally by your voice, by trusting your voice, by knowing that it will make a difference in people's lives, and by investing. Like it is, I have invested in my writing and in my voice and what I have to say. And so this one, I'm going the absolute bare minimum self-publishing, which is I'm bartering the design work with somebody for coaching. And I'm going to be publishing, it's sort of like the on-demand publishing, right? Where they just will print the books up as they're requested. And I have to think about a whole launch situation, which, again, you don't become a writer to figure out your launch plan. So that's what I mean about you got to do it because it's your calling. It's something that really matters to you. And because, you have to have a community around you to get through it. And I don't do anything alone because it's hard. And I do it with people who believe in what I'm doing. And for any of us, this idea that if you do what you love, the money will follow. Not necessarily.
I was
Uh,
just gonna say, yeah, sometimes that you got to find another way to kind of like make money
find another
to fund
way.
your
Right. My
passion.
books are out there. They are doing good for many, many people. And this book will also do good for people. And I'm proud of it, right? Like I'm proud of all this work and this effort and that I'll have a book in my hands and that it's my legacy, right? To my children, to my generations of people. And that's really what drives me.
Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
Um, what would you say? Because it seems like you have definitely stayed very, very true to who you are. You're unraveling, you talked about that in the beginning, and just seems like you're very intentional with being yourself. And I would love to know, what does it mean to be authentically yourself? Because I know we all struggle with showing up
Yeah.
at ourselves. As I said, the conformity, the assimilation to the world. What would you say it means to just be your authentic self?
Yeah, that's a big one. I would say that you have to be willing to be comfortable with solitude. and not not like be the one who's got your back.
Be the one who's got your back. That's a
Like I
note.
always tell people, because no one, I don't care how amazing the people in my life are, there will always be disagreements. There will always be times when we don't see things the same way. Now, am I open to feedback and consejos, right? And am I open to somebody telling me things? 100%, 100%. I think that's part of being authentic, is you have to be willing to hear other people's perspectives and
Mm,
to take them seriously. And in the end of the day, in your quiet space by yourself, you've got to make that decision ultimately, because you're the one who has to live with it.
mm,
So, sometimes, like I said, it means you have to be okay with solitude. Number one, to give yourself reflection time and to really give yourself time to hear your own voice. It is really hard to hear ourselves in the all the flurry of the world and all the messages we have gotten and get every day about what we get to be in the world.
mm,
And so the solitude is really such an important tool to hear and listen to our spirit and all the invisible parts that the world never sees.
mhm.
So I think that's really important. And also because if you really are authentically yourself, people may not stick around.
That
And
that's true.
and it's been hard. I have had people come and go in my life that I just loved. And I've had to just, say it's either me conforming even to amazing, wonderful people who are doing all wonderful things in the world, or to be true to myself. So it can be a difficult, I think we think, oh, when we're authentic, it's all awesome. But
Yeah.
it isn't all awesome. It's actually, it can be a challenge. And, but at the end of the day, I always ask myself, did I do what I believed in? Did I do what I thought was the right thing for me in the moment?
Mm.
Will I change my mind tomorrow? Probably, because I'm growing and changing, and the world is growing and changing all the time. And so it's really a present moment practice for me,
Mm.
to say, well, yesterday that worked, but today that may not. And that level of introspection it's a lot of work. It's a lot of peace at the same time.
Yeah. Ooh, I really resonate with that a lot. I think even just starting this podcast and just, being able to share and leaning into that more of that authenticity of what feels aligned to my life. It is lonely sometimes. It's like, and then you think sometimes, am I doing the right thing?
Yeah.
Should I just conform? It might be a little bit easier that way. That, maybe.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, it does bring ease on some levels and dis-ease in
Yes.
others. The most important thing is to not think that because you are authentic and you're doing what you love in the world, that everything will be easy. 100%, it will probably be a little more difficult because you're going against the grain, as they say, that the world is set up for us to do things the way the economy and capitalism
Yeah.
works and wants us.
Heavy on the capitalism. Yes.
Well, I mean, capitalism is about profit and it is about capital. It is not about people.
Yeah.
And that's just real. Like we can see it, right? When capitalism needs to get more profits, they will, lay off thousands and thousands of people and without really understanding what that really means or not having thought it through. They'll hire all these people and then they'll just get rid of them. And they don't care, they don't sit there and go, let's actually create a reasonable, thoughtful growth plan. Let's that is not important because they will bring us in and spit us out
Mhm.
as needed. And so I think that people think it's easier to conform. I don't think so. I think that,
No,
people say
not
I
for
could
me.
never be an entrepreneur or solopreneur because it's so uncertain. And I go, yeah, tell me what's certain about this capitalist thing. Like, tell me,
What is,
what
yeah.
is certain about that. Life is uncertain. And so you might as well do what brings you some sense of satisfaction, some sense of accomplishment, some sense of joy, because it's not going to be easy no matter what.
Wow. Oh, I love this. I love the wisdom. I love the words. Thank you. Okay. So I have a sentence for you to fill in
Okay.
blanks. So becoming solely you is,
Oof. Becoming solo me is being alive to what is versus what I wish for.
ooh, five to what is versus what I wish for. Did you just speak to me? Oh, okay. And I know we're like wrapping up, so I do want to open up space. Is there anything that you would like to share with listeners? Any projects you're working on, resources, last words of amazing wisdom? And also how can listeners find you? Just you have the floor.
Well, I'm sure, I have a website, lindagonzalez.net, all lowercase, which outlines a lot of what matters to me. It definitely, all my writing is there, my books, and also my BIPOC writing sanctuary program, which is what I love. I'm also very active on Instagram and it's at Mas de Linda, all lowercase. And usually that gets posted on Facebook too, if you're a Facebook kind of person. I don't use the X platform, and that is just a conscious choice around the what was talk about taking a culture that was amazing and just completely gutting it. That's exactly capitalism at its worst. And I offer complimentary coaching sessions and complimentary sessions for writing. I consider that part of my pro bono work to offer you an opportunity to just come with something that you want to think through and just be able to connect with you. I always find that that's just always a lovely opportunity for me to meet wonderful people. I'm also very active on LinkedIn, with my name, and enjoy that community. I always tell people LinkedIn is the little secret
It
society that
is.
people are undervalue. It's real. People on LinkedIn really want to link in, and I believe them, and I link in there, and people link in with me. So I've met all kinds of great people through LinkedIn.
Okay, amazing. I wanted to ask one last thing.
Yes,
If there was any words of wisdom that you could offer to a writer, because we're writers, we're claiming
yes,
it.
we are.
Um, any words of wisdom to a writer who may be listening to this and that they could take to their heart?
Yeah. Um, trust your voice, trust that part of you that is asking you to write. Don't worry about the product, don't worry about the end game. Pay attention to making sure that you have created a safe place for you to write and have find ways to do it in community. Trust your voice and hold on to it. It's one feedback is amazing, and we have to be the people who make the decision about. I always tell people it's my feedback, but you make a decision whether or not you accept it. It's very important. And the other thing is to, set yourself up for success. Claim yourself as a writer. And again, don't worry about what that means. It'll unfold. Just begin to create a structure and be aspirational about it the way you are about any other project that you take on. I had a session with somebody this morning, and I told her, look, you have to organize your writing so that I go, it's like when you go in the kitchen and you need a glass, and you know, if you open up this cupboard, there are the glasses. And this is, if you need the forks, this is where the forks are. I go, to really embrace your writing, you have to create a structure so that when you need to find where are all those ideas that I want to write about one day, you know where they're stored. When you want to write an essay to submit, you know where all your essays are, right? Like when you want to think about submitting, you know where you can go and find places that take the kinds of writing that you want to write. So it's about, making sure you know where everything goes, setting up your kitchen, if you will, so that it brings you ease, because it's not an easy journey in general, and you can make it more easeful.
Okay. All right, y'all. Thank you so much, Linda Gonzalez, for speaking with me today and sharing so much of your wisdom. And there's a lot of like resources packed in here. So if you are a writer, which you are, make sure to reach out to Linda to schedule a consultation. I did, and it was amazing. It was really helpful. And it helped me claim that writer. So we're claiming that on today's episode. And thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Chelsea, for the work that you do and the opportunity you give to people to support ourselves and each other.